Hello everyone, this is part 21 of What If Naruto was in Anbu at 6, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. As I said, Naruto drawled in his usual monotone. Do not move, you are too valuable to be out before you have fulfilled your purpose. What? She gasped, clenching her teeth and eyes shut before slowly willing her lids to open to glare at the man in front of her. What purpose? What are you talking about? Naruto's chilling blue orbs dug deeply into her own, sending pinpricks of ice crawling up and down her arms and legs. He kept his eyes on her as he spoke, not moving a single muscle. You will be used to secure soon as surrender. Temari's eyes widened minutely, thoroughly caught off guard by the sheer bluntness of his statement. But soon it was replaced by burning hot fury. No way. You'll have to K me first. You don't have a choice. His voice was firm and uncaring as she saw her grit her teeth, glaring at him as she glanced around the room once more. Naruto's eyes traveled down to her stomach, where red blotches were beginning to sift through her hospital gown. Temari's eyes rested on the small glass lamp that rested on the table next to the bed, and so with a strong fist she ate it to pieces, gripping one of the shards in her hand, ignoring the biting pain as the shard dug into her palm, ate it wide open as she molded wind chakra into her impromptu weapon, lengthening its blade till it was the length of a normal sword. She leapt over the bed, lunging at the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, the blade leaving a trailing arc as she swung, aiming for his T. Naruto, however, did not even bat an eyelash as she attacked, dodging the swing before he latched onto her wrist with his hand, his grip strong enough to leave a bruise as she was forced to drop her weapon. She hissed in pain before she tried to lash out with her free hand, only for it to be gripped in a similar fashion before the blonde turned her around and forcefully pushed her against the wall, holding her form against it as she struggled in his grasp, kicking out at his legs repeatedly. He absorbed the blows easily, barely even feeling the repeated impacts before the pain and exhaustion of her body showed in her efforts as she continued to be, the red fluid now easily visible through the hospital gown, sweat beginning to mat her hair down to her forehead as he held her against the wall, her legs lost their strength and soon she was being held up by him. Naruto released his grip on her arms and wrapped an arm around her waist, holding her close to himself as he held her up from collapsing, making his way to the bed as he deposited her as gently as possible, not wanting to upset her injuries any more than what they were, ignoring the bees soaking into the fabric of his robes and the black clothes beneath as he released her form. Her sea was heaving with each breath as she weakly glared up at him. Naruto glanced behind him and with a grunt the door parted, revealing a medic Nin as she walked into the room. The blonde Kage turned his eyes back onto the injured Kunoichi as she feebly tried to move in the bed to sit up. You are currently being held in my home. There are several Anbu throughout the entire perimeter of this estate, and you will be allowed to wander throughout the entire estate freely except the scroll room. You are not allowed to leave these grounds. If you attempt to do so, there are 24 Anbu ready to restrain you and bring you back here. Temari sighed, still having the sense of mind to catch his words. Your estate? Why? She paused to swallow down a groan. Why am I being kept here? Naruto answered without even batting an eye. Zhu Liang's reach has proven long and his cunning great. I will not allow him to you, as he no doubt has already begun to plan. My estate is far more secure than a hospital. Temari turned her eyes up to his as she fought off unconsciousness due to the bee loss, her mind recognizing the name of Zhu Liang easily as that of the Reikage. But she didn't understand, he was planning to her. She opened her mouth to question, but before she could her body finally gave out, her head lolling to one side as she fell into sweet unconsciousness, allowing the medic to work on her. Naruto stared at her for a moment before he made a hand gesture, 2 Anbu appearing at his side along with Hinata. You too, he said, gesturing to the Anbu, set up the shifts, do not let this one out of your sights. If she is K or escapes, it will be your head. Understood. The 2 Anbu nodded and bowed before vanishing in a cloud of smoke. Naruto then turned his eyes back onto Hinata. Hinata, he spoke as the Hyuga turned, you are in charge of this house's security, she does not get out and no one that I do not authorize gets in. The Anbu around the house will report directly to you in turn, you will report directly to me. He looked to Temari then. You will stay with her, make sure she does not try anything foolish. If she attempts to attack you, restrain her, but make sure she does not injure herself gravely. Hinata nodded. Understood Naruto-sama, she said with a slight bow. Naruto moved to leave the room when Hinata's voice reached him again. Naruto-sama, how are you so sure Zhuge Liang will attempt an I would, he said simply before striding out of the room. A single lone figure stood amongst the mound of newly dug up earth. The headstones had not been set in place yet, but he knew who it was that now rested eternally beneath them. The drizzling rain soaking him down to the bone as it had not let up since the morning. He stared down solemnly on the mound of dirt, fighting back tears as he stared at it. Father, the solemn whisper left his lips as he took in a shuddering breath, craning his head back in order to look up at the cloudy gray sky, taking a moment to collect himself before he sighed and looked back at the grave. I'm sorry, Father. I should have been there. I should have been there to help you. If only I was stronger. Excuse me. The young man turned around, finding the crimson-red eyes of Yuhi Kurenai staring at him, her raven black hair blending in with her black mourning clothes, one hand gripping an umbrella while the other held the robe tighter to herself, as if shielding her form from the harsh biting coldness of their in and moist air. She had been walking back to her apartment when she caught sight of the young Kiri ninja from the road. I don't mean to disturb you. Tushiro-san, correct. But, you will get very ill if you continue to stand out here in this rain. Tushiro turned his eyes back to the grave. Thank you, Yuhi-san. He paused in order to remember her name. But I will stay. Kurenai said nothing, her eyes shining with something akin to pity for the young man as she stepped forward, placing the umbrella in order to shield them both from the rain that pelted down from the heavens. Tushiro said nothing as he felt the constant pitter-patter of the rain against his back, shoulders and scalp vanish. He continued to stare at the uneven dirt for several more moments before he spoke again. I remember, when he first adopted me. I always feared he would regret his decision one day, so I always did my best to make him proud, always trying twice as hard as I normally would when he was around. He did not know why he was saying this to someone who was essentially a total stranger. Perhaps he needed to get it off his sea, perhaps his grief had finally proven too much for him, but regardless, the words were coming, and they would not be stopped, not by his will or his reasoning. He always tried to assure me of the fact that he saw me like a real son, not just some boy with potential he took pity on. Kurenai's eyes softened as she stared down at the ground. She had not known Guan very well, other than a few passing words over the years, but the few times she had spoken to him she had seen a man of honor, pride and politeness. Despite his superior skills, he had not looked down upon any of the ninja he had come across, even the young Chunins. He treated them all with respect. She could only imagine the grief his adopted son must be currently feeling. She kept her silence and allowed him to continue speaking uninterrupted. But I wanted to meet and surpass his expectations of me. I wanted to truly make him proud that I was his son, but... The young man paused as tears slipped past his defenses, trailing down his cheeks until they dripped off his chin, falling to the moist earth beneath them, being absorbed into the soil like the trillions of other raindrops like it. The young man took a shuddering breath as his shoulders shook. But now I'll never be able to do that, never be able to show him I could have been the son he wanted. A few choked sobs escaped him as Kurenai wrapped her free arm around him, holding him a bit closer to her before she began rubbing circles on his back. Finally, after she felt it was safe enough to continue, she nudged him gently, leading him away. Come on, these rains do you no good, Tushiro-san. The young man sighed before kneeling before the grave, placing 2 fingers to his lips before placing them to the grave, allowing the crimson-eyed Junin to lead him away from the gravesite. Meanwhile, not too far away, Ginchiko was quite contentedly drowning herself in alcohol. Sitting in a dingy little barstool, still adorning the funeral robes, she downed glass after small glass of sake, her eyes red with unshed tears. As she moved to drink another glass of sake, a firm hand caught her wrist, holding it, and the glass away from her lips, bringing her eyes up to that of one Maito guy. Let go. She glared at the spandex-wearing Junin. The taijutsu specialist shook his head. I am sorry, Ginchiko-san, but I cannot allow you to continue with this unyouthfulness. She snarled before she stood, shoving him off of her with enough strength to send him stumbling into a nearby table, knocking down several of the items resting on it. This isn't a damn joke, you green moron. She yelled as she stood on wobbly legs, knocking over her own stool in the process. Guy's eyes softened for a moment as he straightened himself out, ignoring the eyes of the wary bartender who now looked at them with eyes full of warning that they would pay for anything they broke. Bounces in a ninja village may as well have been useless, especially against a Junin, even a drunk one. It was not meant as a joke, Ginchiko-san, he said in an attempt to appease her, stepping forward with his hands held in front of him as if to show he meant her no harm. The woman's cheeks were tinged with a light hue of pink, indicating that she already had quite a bit to drink as it was. But please, let us leave this place. Guan wouldn't want you to be doing this to yourself. Well, that's too bad. I didn't want him to so we all obviously don't get what we want, do we, Maito? The venom in her voice was not directed entirely at him, he knew, but it didn't stop them from wincing at the tone. The woman seemed to catch herself as her eyes trailed away from him, stumbling as she grabs hold of another nearby stool. First Hidetada, then Guan, just how many more will before this is over? Guy moved to answer when another voice said, My, how pathetic. The two turned their eyes to the entrance of the bar as the curtains parted, revealing Mika as she entered the bar, her bee-red eyes gleaming as both they and her ghostly white hair stood out due to her black clothing. Here you are drinking away like the pathetic weakling I always thought you'd be. Whimpering and crying like a child who lost her favorite stuffed animal. Ginchiko's eyes narrowed as she hissed, nearly snarling at the younger girl. Well, not all of us can be psychotic, unfeeling harpies from hell, can we? The younger Kanoiki tilted her head to the side, smirking slightly. I'll take that as a compliment. You crazy unfeeling bee. The older Kanoiki roared as she went to grasp her sword that leaned against the bar, being held back by Guy as the taijutsu master rushed up behind her and held her hands behind her back, pulling her away from the blade as he wrapped an arm around her neck. He was your damn sensei. That he was, Mika remarked absently as she idly flicked her fingernails. And a rather good one at that. I'll always remember what he taught me, especially the rules of the shinobi. You remember that one rule? The one that says, a shinobi must always keep their emotions in check no matter the situation. I think I always liked that one the most. She paused as she saw the struggling woman try to get out of Guy's grip, smirking. But I don't suppose you'd remember that little rule, would you? Ginchiko's breaths heaved as she finally began to calm down, slowing her struggles as she glared at the young woman. I remember it, but I suppose someone as heartless as an orphan bee like you would certainly have an easier time at it. It must have broken you up when he adopted Tushiro, but never you, huh? Mika's smile fell before any more words could be said. Guy released Ginchiko and walked between the two women. I believe you should leave, he said as he crossed his arms. The younger Kiri Kanoiki's eyes traveled to Guy's unusually serious face before she smirked, turning and walking out of the bar. Guy then turned his eyes to Ginchiko. Walking over to her, he wrapped a single arm around her shoulders. Come on. This place does you no good, he said before leading her out of the bar. Zhu Liang sat in his office doing his best to clear his mind as well as he could. Running a hand through his raven black hair, he heard the door open. Trailing his eyes upwards, he found the one and only Sabaku no Gara walking into his office. Ah, Kazekage Dono, he said, standing up from his chair. Please, have a seat, he said, gesturing to the piece of furniture in front of his desk. Gara nodded before he moved to sit. The Raikage waited for Gara to take his seat before he leaned forward on his desk, lacing his hands in front of his face. Gara-san, I know you wish to remain here, in order to overlook your brother's treatments, but I need to ask you to return to Suna as soon as possible. Gara sighed before he nodded, looking up to the older man. He spoke. I realize that Kankuro is in too delicate a state to move, but I cannot allow that to stop me. I will begin my return to Suna by tomorrow. I have already begun my own preparations. Liang nodded as he leaned back in his chair. That is good to hear. I will assign you a squad of 4 of my best Anbu to guard you along your way. Just 2, please, Gara said. A smaller group has a smaller chance of being detected. The sleeping dragon nodded. As you wish then. Now. He stood and walked over to a large map hung on the wall of the office, gesturing for Gara to join him. The Kazekage did so, and soon they were both standing in front of the map. Zhu Liang placed his hand over a specific spot on the map. Your Junin subordinate, a man known as Baki, has begun to move troops onto Suna and Konoha's borders, So far there have merely been a few light skirmishes, few injuries on both sides, even fewer casualties, but very soon that will escalate. Now, when you arrive at Suna, you must quickly take control of your armies and strike out against the outposts here. He gestured to one area north of Suna, in an area between the borders of Am and Iwa, an area they could access due to Suna's near total control of bird country. In the near decades since the rise of the Konoha Empire, Suna, Kumo and the previously independent land of Iwa had worked on gaining control of small merchant villages in the surrounding lands, not only to strengthen their own economy, but also to use these lands as buffer zones between their respective villages. Suna had taken bird country, Kumo had taken a small city known as the Jiangling, a port city just south of their lands and a little north of Hai no Kuni. Iwa had taken Sakai and Konoha itself had taken river country, tea country, the city of Maidong and Chiaku in the north and the land of rice fields once known as Otogakur. Here, he then gestured to another border guard in the Konoha-controlled land of river country, the buffer zone between Konoha and Suna. And finally here, he gestured to the last target, causing Gaara to get an incredulous look on his face. Tea country. Tea country lay all the way across the ocean from Suna, the only land access was deep in fire country territory. Reikage Dono, though Kumo and Kiri, subsequently Konoha may have a navy. Suna does not. We have no way of crossing the ocean in order to reach Tea country. I know you have no navy Kazekage Dono. However, he gestured to the far south of Suna. He pointed to the Gulf of Dankai, right next to that was the port city of Sugi. I have already sent several of Kumo's heavy battleships across the Jiangling in secret. With luck they will remain undetected from Kiri's naval patrols and will arrive at the city of Sugi in 1 to 2 weeks. Gaara nodded. I see. How many men can your ships carry to Tea country? If all of the battleships arrive, then they can easily carry over 700 ninja with supplies and food to last nearly a month. A surplus of course. 200 men to Tea country on these ships, 300 to the outpost near bird country and another 300 to the outpost near river country, and keep your main force with you in order to act as reserves or emergency relief forces. Gaara raised an eyebrow. Rather astute guesses. What will you do? As it stands right now I am still making preparations, but in 2 weeks' time I will be launching attacks here. He gestured to the northeastern border of the land that was previously Oto. Here, he gestured south of the now Kumo-controlled city of Jiangling, near the eastern coastline along the border of Konoha. And my navy will be landing in this peninsula. He gestured to the land that previously belonged to the merchant city of Maidong, west of Oto and east of Waterfall. Gaara nodded. I see. Is there anything you wish to accomplish with this six-pronged attack? I mean, despite the obvious splitting of his forces. Liang nodded. Perceptive. I see. Yes, there is an alternative purpose. Iwa. Iwa has been recently conquered. Its people held by a leash of virtual S. Naruto has over Toyohisa Shimazu, not unlike the Hyuga seal of the branch family used several years ago. With these attacks Yoshihiro may see an opportunity to rebel. I will go to Iwa soon, before the attacks begin in order to barter him a deal. If he accepts, then we can expect reinforcements from Iwa. If he does not, which I don't believe will happen, then we will be on our own. As it stands, however, Iwa with the recent conflict has weakened them greatly as well as weakened Naruto's own forces, however minutely. We still have a numerical disadvantage, but not as great as I had feared it would be. We also have a slight advantage in terms of terrain. Your climate makes it difficult for those without experience and knowledge to last long in the desert, and for Kumo the high mountain peaks have made for a perfect natural defense similar to Iwa, as there are only several passes that can be used to reach our city. Gaara nodded. The silence before them stretched on for a while, before it was abruptly broken by the alarm of a clock. Liang bowed. Forgive me Kazekage Dono, but I must go. Of course. Gaara bowed, allowing Liang to take his leave. Before the Reikage made it to the door, however, Gaara spoke up. Zhuge Liang, what are our chances of winning? Liang paused for a moment before he answered. Unfortunately, I haven't the slightest idea. Once I know, so will you. Before he stepped out of the office, Zhuge Liang solemnly descended the stairs of one of his Anbu headquarters, his footsteps echoing off the dank murky stone halls. The dripping of water from overhead pipes rang loudly in his ears as he made his way down. Reaching the bottom of the steps, he caught sight of Sunade standing outside of the room, her blonde hair cascading over her shoulders as she sighed. turning her eyes to him as he approached. Have you already gone in? He questioned. In response, she nodded. Yes. Before she sighed somberly. It did not go very well. Tsunade slowly opened the door, the creaking hinges grating from misuse as she opened the portal fully, entering the darkened room it barred entrance to. Light filtered in through the hallway and the small lamps on the side of the room, giving Tsunade an easy view of the young girl curled up on the bed, facing the wall away from the door. Tsunade carefully made her way over to the bed, noticing the chains shackled onto the girl's visible ankles and another around her torso, probably attached to her wrist, considering she was turned the other way. The medic soon became enraged at the sight. She understood the need for caution with Liang, but this was unacceptable. Akina was not some common prisoner or animal they could just keep caged. She wouldn't accept it. She would have words with the sleeping dragon when next they spoke. But taking another look at the girl, she put aside her anger for now. Tsunade grabbed a nearby chair, dragging it over to the side of the bed as she sat down. When she received no response, she slowly reached over and gripped the girl's shoulder. Akina. Her voice was soft and sorrowful as she spoke, her hazel brown eyes staring at the back of the girl's head. Her sun-K locks seemed paler somehow, as if they were withering away due to the last few days' events. Tsunade-sama. The younger girl questioned, craning her back to face the legendary medic. Her blue eyes were red from crying, tear streaks that ran down her cheeks only accentuated this fact. Before Tsunade could say anything, her eyes dimmed, dulling as if the woolen life was being sapped from them. You knew too, that's why he let you in here. Tsunade opened her mouth but soon sighed in resignation before she nodded. Yes, I knew. A strangled laugh escaped the younger girl, though it was mirthless and filled with pain. It tore at Tsunade's heart. Akina shook her head against the pillows. How many more no ha? Was it the whole damn village? Were you all just playing nice and laughing at me all the while as sensei pulled my strings like some damn puppet? No. Tsunade spoke quickly. No. Only I and Liang knew. But I swear, she continued swiftly, the only reason I ever kept this from you is because I was concerned for you, Akina. Concerned for me. Concerned for me. The young girl nearly yelled as she got up and turned around fully in her bed, lashing out with her ingle hand before it was forcefully held back by the chains. Concerned for me. So what? You were concerned enough to keep me dancing on strings while you and Liang would keep sicking me on a man that could K the both of you. That's concern. Tsunade was not taken aback by her anger. She had been expecting it after all. When I learned of your connection to the Uzumaki boy, you were still very young and recovering from very many emotional and traumatic events in your life. The death of your parents, the discovery of being a second Kyuubi Jinchuriki. If I would have told you that he was your brother, then who knows what would have happened to you. You could have completely lost your mind. She was nearly begging the younger girl to understand what a difficult position she had been in. The human psyche could only take so much before it snapped, if it had to deal with such a hard psychological blow so shortly after the death of her parents, something that Akina had not fully come to terms with until 2 years after the fact at the very least. Who knows what would have happened, and at that point she had kept the secret for so long she didn't know how to break it to the girl. Akina sat back on the bed, leaning her back against the wall as she looked down at the mattress, tears trailing down her cheeks and falling off her chin. Tell me how can I ever trust what you say ever again, Tsunade? The medic's eyes grew sad as she searched for an answer to give the younger girl, but in the end, she could come up with nothing. I don't know. Akina continued to stare at the mattress for several long moments before she spoke. Get out. When Tsunade made no move to do so, she yelled. I said get out. Tsunade sighed and bowed once before turning on her heel and walking out of the room. Reaching the door, she gave another glance at the Jinchuriki. For whatever it may be worth, I am sorry. Before she turned and closed the door behind her, leaving the younger blonde alone in her cell. Tsunade looked at the apathetic rakeage before she spoke. I want those chains off her, Liang. They are a precaution for the moment. He explained, glancing at her. Either you take 'em off or I break 'em off, either way they're not lasting the night. The medic warned. They had done enough wrong to this girl, they would not do another one. Liang closed his eyes and nodded. Very well, once I am done seeing her I will go up to the Anbu captain and tell him to remove them. Tsunade nodded. You better. Before she turned and walked down the hallway, making her way to the exit. Liang watched her leave before turning his eyes back to the door. He took a deep breath before he opened the door and made his way into the cell. He found the young girl in much a similar position to the one Sunid had left her in. Her back against the wall, her eyes facing downward. When he opened the door, she looked up at him, her eyes narrowing as she bared her already lengthening fangs. He nodded in greeting. Akina, what do you want? She snarled. The venom in her voice and raw fury in her eyes spoke volumes of the levels of disdain and contempt she now held for him. Liang sighed. I realize that you're very hurt, and that you're very angry at me, Akina. He said slowly as he took a seat across from her, making sure to stay beyond her chain's reach. I know that what I did to you may have been, that it is, unforgivable. A betrayal of the highest degree, but I hope that you can understand that I had no choice in the matter. You had choices, you had many choices. She interrupted, her grip on the bed sheets tightening. You just made the wrong ones. She glared deeply into his eyes. You didn't just betray me. Zhu Liang, you betrayed my trust, you betrayed the faith I once held in you, you betrayed the belief that everything I ever did for you, that everything you ever said and asked of me was to earn your respect, your friendship and your love. I loved you, you were more than a sensei to me, you were like a father to me. Liang took a deep breath and closed his eyes. He knew to the extent, to the depth this wound went. But he had tried to keep his distance from her for this reason. He wanted to endear her to him, but not so much in case of this very event. But apparently he had failed, something confirmed as he listened to her painful and heartfelt voice. All of that is gone now, she finally said, glaring at him. Looking at the chains on her wrists and ankles, she added. Obviously, she growled before turning her eyes up to him. A subordinate cannot serve a commander he doesn't trust. I will no longer fight for you, Zhu Liang. That single sentence seemed to reverberate off the walls, like a deep gong going off right next to them. I see, Liang said as he slowly stood, her blue orbs followed his movements. I will be leaving for Iwa in 2 days, Akina. When I return, we will discuss this further. There isn't anything to discuss, she interrupted. You are obviously very upset. He continued, ignoring her. He turned his eyes back up to her own. For what it's worth, I truly am sorry, he said before he walked out of the cell. Outside the iron door, Liang sighed. That could have gone much better, but it was not an entirely unforeseen circumstance, and thus, not entirely beyond some measure of control. The sound of rusty hinges echoed across the subterranean portion of the Anbu headquarters, the grating creak sending chills down the spine of many a passerby. A single Anbu carrying a tray of food into the moss-covered cell. The man sighed tiredly as he looked upon the uneaten tray on the small night table on the side of the bed before turning his eyes on the young blonde girl who remained in the same position she had for several days now, her arms hugging her knees as she sat on the bed, her back against the wall. Already her skin was beginning to lose its tanned color, becoming more pale in its pigment due to the lack of sun, her eyes were shadowed by her hair, the blue orbs reflecting what little light reached them, giving off a very eerie feel as the Anbu looked at her. Sighing, he placed his tray on the midnight table next to her, keeping his eyes fixed on her. He recognized her as a young girl who had been apprenticed to the Kazekage. He didn't know why she was here, but he'd been warned that she had the potential to be very unstable and that he should be on guard to a potential attack. Supposedly some events in the last battle against Konoha had made her lose her mind. While he couldn't blame her, he had to wonder why she wasn't shackled like she'd been when she arrived. It was just stupid to leave a mentally unstable prisoner to just be walking around, free to attack if she so chose to do so. She kept her eyes on him, her piercing blue eyes making him repress the desire to shift from foot to foot uncomfortably. Setting down her new tray, he picked up the old one, which seemed as if it hadn't even been touched before he turned sharply on his heel, doing his best to ignore the blue eyes that pierced his back as he quickly shut the door, ignoring the creak of the grating hinges as the door shut with a resounding clatter. Sifting through the keys in his pocket, he found the small piece of metal with ease and snapped the lock closed with a resounding crank. Akina watched the Anbu leave before turning her eyes onto the tray of food. It had been 2 days since Zhu Liang and Sunid had come to see her. In that time, no one else had shown up, except for the Anbu that brought her food. But she didn't eat, she simply refused to. She didn't know what was in that food, and, at this point, she wouldn't put it past Liang to drug her with some kind of toxin to make her obedient. He had more than proven himself willing to use her for his own ends, she wouldn't allow herself to fall for it again. He had told her that sometime today he would be leaving for Iwa, that was his mistake. She knew any attempt of escaping would be foiled by him. He could always best her in a spar, and he knew her fighting style inside and out. She couldn't have risked trying to escape because if she did and he caught her then he'd put chains on her again, perhaps even chakra draining this time. But once he left, that was her window. She settled herself into a meditative position, she didn't want to alert anyone to what she was planning, which is why she snapped herself out of her trance when she felt the Anbu approaching. If she succeeded in her attempts, then she could escape this place and leave Kumo. She wasn't sure what she would do once she got outside of Kumo, but she had to get out of here, she refused to stay here, not with Liang, and not with Tsunade. Yugito and Shizun's faces flashed in her mind's eye for a moment but she forcefully pushed them away before returning her attention to what she was doing. Hopefully she would be able to accomplish her goal soon enough. It was dangerous to eat, but it was also dangerous to not eat, obviously. Shizun had taught her a thing or two about the human body, and she was more grateful for it now than ever. Essentially the body uses glucose as its main metabolic fuel if it is available. About 20% of the total energy consumption occurs in the brain. The rest of the glucose consumption fuels muscle tissue and red B cells. Glucose can be obtained directly from dietary sugars and carbs. In the absence of dietary sugars and carbs, it is obtained from the breakdown of glycogen. Glycogen is a readily accessible storage form of glucose, stored in small quantities in the liver and muscles. The body's glycogen reserve can provide glucose for about 12 hours. After the glycogen reserve is used up, glucose can be obtained from the breakdown of fats. Fats from adipose tissue are broken down into glycerol and free fatty acids. Glycerol can then be used by the liver to produce glucose. However, the brain requires about 120 grams of glucose per day, and at this rate the brain will quickly use up the body's remaining carbohydrate stores. However, the body has a backup plan, which involves molecules known as ketone B. Ketone B are short-chain derivatives of fatty acids. These shorter molecules can cross the B-brain barrier and can be used by the brain as an emergency metabolic fuel. After 3 to 4 days of fasting, the liver begins to synthesize ketone B from precursors obtained from fatty acid breakdown. The brain uses these ketone B as fuel, thus see its requirement for glucose. After fasting for 3 days, the brain gets 30% of its energy from ketone B. After 4 days, this goes up to 70%. After several days of fasting, all cells in the body begin to break down protein. This releases amino acids into the B, which can be converted into glucose by the liver. Starvation ensues when the fat reserves are completely exhausted and protein is the only fuel source available to the body. Thus, after periods of starvation, the loss of body protein affects the function of important organs, and death results, even if there are still fat reserves left unused. In a leaner person, the fat reserves are depleted earlier, the protein depletion occurs sooner, and therefore death occurs sooner. So, the way she figured it, she weighed roughly 135 to 145 pounds. Given the average human's breakdowns of energy reserves, she had 4 days in total before the fasting began to wear down her muscle tissue. She had stopped eating roughly 2 days ago. So that would mean that she had about 2 days left. Settling herself into her meditative stance, she immersed herself into the recess of her mind. Yugito ran past staff of the hospital and regular civilians blindly, ignoring Shizun as she yelled after her to come back. She rushed past everyone, pushing them out of her way as she ran towards the exit of the hospital. It just couldn't be. She refused to believe what she had seen outside her hospital window. That sight, that broken and charred ruin simply could not be her village. But, as she pushed open the double-glass hospital doors with all the strength her recently awakened body could muster, she could not deny herself the truth any longer. What had once been an active metropolis, a city teeming with life, was now little more than a shattered memory in the face of the devastation that now plagued it. Yugito felt her eyes glistening with tears. The twin orbs looked like glass as she let them pass over the village. Both hands moved in a vague motion as if she was going to grip her sea, but they soon went to her stomach as she collapsed on her knees. Her breaths came in short, quick pants as she began to hyperventilate. She quickly placed one hand on the ground to hold herself up as she lurched forward, feeling as though she was about to throw up. She felt someone, possibly Shizune, rush up behind her. One of the medic's arms wrapped around Yugito in an embrace while the other rubbed soothing circles over her back. Tears trailed from Yugito's eyes down her cheeks, dripping from her chin onto the gravel clenched between her fingers as she let her eyes travel over the village. She could see them all, men and women, young and old, as they moved like the weight of the world was on their shoulders, sorrow brimming behind their features. She saw an old woman with a child, placing flowers next to a sidewalk, no doubt the site where one of their family members had during the attack. The young boy had tears in his eyes, wiping at them furiously as they continued to pour freely. Yugito opened her mouth as if to speak, but whatever words sought their release became lodged in her tea. Finally the old woman turned away, beckoning the little boy away from the sight, his sobs continuing to reach Yugito's ears as the distance between them increased. The Nibi Jinchuriki looked down at the ground, where now both hands shook as they struggled to hold up her weight. Where was I? Shizune, where was I when all of this happened? Shizune herself struggled to hold back her own tears as she continued to rub soothing circles across the female Jinchuriki's back. The Akatsuki member, hidden, caused extensive damage to several arteries and key organs in your body. Even your heart was damaged. You would have several times over if it hadn't been for the Nibi. Even so, your body needed extensive time, at least for a Jinchuriki, to heal properly. You have been unconscious for nearly 3 weeks, since the day of the Akatsuki's attack on you. Yugito's fists clenched tightly, the gravel crunching in her palm as her eyes clenched shut, tears leaking past her closed lids heedless as they dripped onto the ground. I should have been here, she whispered to herself quietly. Shizune's eyes took on a look of pity. There was nothing, yo. I should have been here. The Kumo Kunoiki roared suddenly, see her off as she shoved the medic away, standing up on shaky legs. This is my village. I should have done something, anything. She yelled before turning her back on Shizune and fixing her eyes back onto the shattered remnants of her city. I should have been here, she whispered to herself as she buried her face in her hands, sobs beginning to rack her frame as Shizune walked up to her and enveloped her in a comforting hug. Shush shush, the medic whispered as she rocked the Kunoiki gently from side to side. It's all right, she whispered as she allowed herself to be Yugito's sympathetic shoulder. No doubt they all needed one at this point. But soon Yugito turned her eyes back onto Shizune's as she pulled away from the embrace, her eyes still shimmering with tears. Shizune, where is Akina? Toshiro sighed as he rubbed his forehead tiredly. The previous day's events had taken much out of him and it seemed like they were just now willing to catch up to him fully, weighing down on his shoulders as he kept his eyes open and trying to stay alert throughout the morning's events. You look tired, a voice to his right commented, bringing the young man's attention over to Ginchiko. Standing up he hastily bowed to the older woman in greeting. Ginchiko-san. Please, she said haltingly. Just Ginchiko. Your father would have wanted that much at least, she said stepping a bit closer to him. She looked him over once, smiling a bit in something akin to bittersweetness as she wiped some dust off his shoulders. It's strange, but somehow you really do remind me so much of him, how he was when he was your age. I never really would have guessed that you were adopted if I'd just met you. She looked into his eyes, then smiling a little bit more as she saw the growth for her words in his features. He'd be proud of you. She paused as she took out a scroll from her pouch. He would also want you to have this, she said, handing it to him. Toshiro looked down at the scroll held firmly in her hands as he took it in his own. This is your father's sword, yes, she answered his unasked question, closing her eyes a bit as if in a silent sigh before looking up to Toshiro's eyes. Be assured that even though you are not his son by B, he always loved you as if you were. I know this is what he would have wanted. Toshiro smiled before he slowly handed the scroll back. No. Father always said, one must forge his own path in this world. I think he would rather I do the same in this situation. Ginchiko's shocked eyes slowly gained a look of understanding and she smiled softly at the young man that stood before her. You really are his son, aren't you? She said with a small smile as she placed her hand on his shoulder. Toshiro smiled before he gave her a quick hug. Thank you. That means a lot coming from you, he said, pulling back. Before more could be said, the door to Naruto's office opened, revealing the Godime Hokage himself. His eyes finding him as he nodded. Ah, good you're here, he greeted. Come with me, he said, turning back and heading into his office, the two Kiri ninja walking up behind him. Naruto walked around his desk, seating himself in the cage chair as they two took up the seats in front of him. Naruto held silence for a brief moment before he spoke. I realize that this is a trying time for you, so soon after Guan's death. However, I'm afraid his loss will mean much more than our own personal grief. Naruto stood from his chair, walking over to one of his many file cabinets. He pulled out one particularly large file and set it down on the table. You do not know this, but Guan was a key factor in several of my future plans and contingency plans. He was a powerful figure on the battlefield, and his presence could inspire the soldiers. His death, along with this defeat, has hit the morale of our warriors very hard. His blue eyes turned then, meeting theirs. Also, with the decay of such a known figure, Kumo's momentum, despite the damage to their village, is relatively high, military-wise. Already my scouts report reconstruction efforts taking place in Kumo, as well as relief efforts in terms of food and trade coming in from Snow Country to the north. It appears Liang was well prepared to recover from the self-destruction of his own village. That is why I must assign the two of you separate tasks. One of which will be the... He paused, taking over of what would have been Guan's duties for this event. Toshiro stood up without hesitation. I will do it. Toshiro, you should wait to hear what it is first. Guan was a very powerful and intelligent man, you may be trying to fill in his shoes too soon. Ginchiko warned. Naruto nodded. Indeed, even though a defeat at Kumo was not expected, I did not entirely remove the possibility from my mind, and this scenario of what may very well be a two-pronged attack from Suna and Kumo I also foresaw. Guan's duty in this case would have been to guard our northern border from Kumo's attack force, and to hold a defensive line until Kumo wore itself out. While Ginchiko most likely would lead naval raids over supply ships arriving at the port city of Jianling, along Kumo's southern border, weakening whatever supplies and reinforcements they may be receiving by sea. But now, with Guan's death, it is between yourself, Toyohisa, and Ginchiko to decide who will lead the defense, and who will lead the navy. What about Mika? Toshiro questioned. She is also a Kiri ninja, and is affiliated with our navy just as much as I and Ginchiko are. Mika is a strong and ruthless Kunoichi, true, but she is not a defensive fighter. And now is not the time to attack. Now is the time to tighten the defenses until the enemy slips up. Ginchiko, you know this young man best, which assignment do you believe he would be suited to? Ginchiko glanced up to Toshiro as he turned his eyes to look back at her, pleading for her to grant him the opportunity to prove himself, to prove that he could be equal to his father. The brown-haired woman sighed before she stood up. Lord, I think Toshiro would be the best choice for the land-based defenses, she said simply, watching from her peripheral vision as his eyes lit up with growth before turning onto Naruto. The blonde Cage eyed them both. Very well. Be ready by tomorrow. There will be 3 Anbu squads waiting for you at the north gate at 6 a.m. You will take them and head towards our northernmost border guards, understand? Toshiro nodded and bowed. Thank you, Naruto-sama. You won't regret this. Naruto nodded before turning to Ginchiko. Once you return to Kiri, you will mobilize a fleet, of whatever size you deem fit, and being your attacks on Kumo's supply ships as soon as possible. Understood. The Kiri swordswoman nodded. Good. Dismissed. The blonde spoke, watching as they both turned and left the room. Naruto sat down in his chair. Zhuge Liang, you may very well be the sleeping dragon, but I promise you, this is one war one will not let you win. The world slowly swirled into view, colors mixing, light bending. The distortions of a hazed mind and fluttering eyelids slowly mulling each other out, and becoming a single coherent image as Akina slowly emerges into a conscious state. Her breathing was heavy, every deep breath of air, hurting her, putting pressure on her as if her lungs were going to burst inside of her. The air was humid, but hot, almost like steam. She groaned, getting up to her knees as she struggled to pick herself up to her full height, only to lurch forward in a coughing fit, the pain in her lungs making her wince every time she coughed and was forced to take a deep breath. She took a look at her surroundings, ankle-deep water, a beam of light, from directly above, illuminating an area of about 50 feet in all directions from her. But after that light there was only blackness, like a veil had been dropped around her, darkening the entire world outside this small space. I see you've decided to visit, a voice chuckled, the deep booming sound echoing all around her. She staggered for a moment, entering another fit of coughs as she retched, almost unloading her stomach contents but held back. Worthless mortal. The voice roared suddenly as a massive claw shot out from the darkness around her. A strangled gasp escaped her before she dove to the side, avoiding the claw as it s down on the area where she previously stood. The rattling of chains suddenly became apparent to her ears, and the darkness seemed to take on a grayish tone, as if a light from within was growing slightly stronger, illuminating the area from the inside out. She could begin to see something though. The faint sheen of fur, red fur, gleaming even in the darkness. Before she could think on it further, the claw pulled back, the clink and clank of metal tearing through the silence with it as two red eyes snapped open, staring straight at her, even through the darkness. Weak, was all the great beast said as it stared down at her. Its head seemed to move, and the grating of metal and clinking of chains again reached her ears. I grant you my powers fully at your disposal. And you cannot even defeat that small insect of a brother of yours. Akina slowly stood up from where she had fallen, her clothes and hair wet as she stared up at the great kitsune. My brother, you want me to K him too. I hold no love for you pitiful sacks of child. I would K you just as easily as I would K 1,000 others, it makes no difference to me. But that arrogant, impertinent wretch you call kin. The QB seemed to shimmer in the darkness, the temperature of the water she was standing in rising by several degrees. He believed he could control me. He was arrogant enough to continuously force my cooperation, a force that was only perpetuated by the seal that bound me to him. Oh yes, if there is one human I would truly wish to S, it would be him. Second only to the fool who put me here in the first place. Akina closed her eyes, fighting back tears of frustration that threatened to build up behind her eyelids. She had focused so hard on defeating Naruto, on surpassing him, on K him. It had been her goal for so long, but now she didn't know even if that goal had just been another fabrication, some other form of control Liang had over her, or even if this desire was hers anymore to begin with. Who did this goal belong to? Her. Liang. The Nine Tails. She took a deep breath, steeling her features before she looked up at the kitsune again. I need why. I know what you want, child. The Ninetails interrupted her, his voice, somewhere between a taunt and a sneer. I have seen your mind, I know exactly what you want. You wish to escape. You wish me to grant you the ability to fully wield the fourth tail of power, allowing you to keep your wits and your senses for a short time in order to fight your way out of this place while your sensei is away. You wish to leave Kumo. The Nine Tails paused, looking at the young girl as she gave a quick, curt nod. QB's teeth suddenly gleamed, flashing a grin full of malice at the Kanoiki. Why would I do something like that, foolish Kanoiki? He questioned rhetorically, watching her as her eyes widened in something akin to horror. Zhu Liang is an able commander, and it seems to me, he is my best chance at K that Uzumaki boy, even in your weak body. I see no reason to assist you in this fruitless escape. She opened her mouth to speak, but the Ninetails quickly see her off, his tone almost nonchalant. I care not if he must force your obedience with drugs or illusions, or of your worthless trust and betrayed confidence in him. I only have one goal, and that is to K Uzumaki Naruto. And assisting you in your escape, as I have said, would seem more detrimental in that attempt. The fox explained calmly, looking as if he had his head to one side. Akina stared at the fox, her mouth agape and eyes wide as she processed what was being said to her. She hung her head, eyes closing tight as her fist shook at her side. A sight which the fox found unbelievably amusing. Until he felt something shift. When she glanced back up at him, he knew for a fact that something was different. When her eyes stared at him now, QB could see it all, now beneath the brave front, beneath the desperation that had brought her here, beneath the confusion. There was this small, almost underlying hint of what the kitsune could easily recognize. Madness. It was there, just brimming beneath the surface, a thin layer of reason, as thin as a gossamer thread was all that was left. The girl had been pushed too far, too fast and too soon. Akina smiled a hard, tense smile at the kitsune, flashing her enlarged canines as she did. QB, if you don't help me, then I swear you will never reach that goal of K, my brother. Ever. The kitsune growled. Are you threatening me, child? No. She answered simply. It's a promise. She paused, staring up into his eyes. Because if you don't help me, then the first thing I'm gonna do when I wake up again, is that I'm going to walk over to the table, break off a leg so that it has a nice and sharp point, and I will S myself in the heart, and I will keep it there until it stops beating. QB watched her. He watched her very carefully. Throughout her entire speech she never once dropped the cold smile that graced her features, the corner of her eyes leaking bitter tears that trailed down her cheeks and dripped onto the ankle-deep water below her. But the most profound thing of all was that she stared straight at him. Staring him in the eye. No human, no demon, apart from 3 other individuals had ever done that. One was the Shinigami, the second was the Yondaime Hokage, and third, was her very own brother. She was staring him down and there was no hint of even the faintest hint of fear present. You lie, the kitsune said, testing the waters. You wouldn't take your own life. Akina smiled, chuckling like a fool as she spread her arms wide. What else do I have to take? She questioned, almost jovially as she laughed at him. The 9 tails looked at her again, a long tense silence passing between the two for a very long while as the great demon analyzed his options. He had very little doubt that in her current state she wouldn't hesitate to actually make good on her threat. But for his ultimate goal of freedom, he needed the Uzumaki boy and he knew well enough that it could not be done without this one's aid. He would just have to find some way to manipulate her again once this whole fiasco was over. But that was not to say he couldn't twist this to his own advantage in the long run. But one thing was for certain, if she stayed here for much longer her mind and will would either be broken, or she would by her own hand. With a roar the kitsune's claws lunged for the girl, and with a sickening squelch. I will use my power, child, for now. The guard carrying the tray of food slowly shifted through his set of keys as he stood in front of the door, only to watch, somewhat perplexed as a red glow came from behind the door. The key was soon forgotten, drawing his blade as the food clattered to the floor and he moved to speak into his radio transmitter. Then, the door was suddenly blasted open, sending him, and the great iron hunk of metal into the adjacent wall as the prisoner slowly emerges from her cell. The man only manages to catch a brief glimpse of a foot-out offclaw, covered in red chakra step in front of him before his whole world went dark. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.